The neon lights of Benny's roadhouse flickered against the darkening California sky as Max, a 34-year-old Army veteran, parked his worn-out Chevy Silverado in the gravel lot. Benny's wasn't glamorous, just a roadside bar along Route 66, frequented by truckers, locals and wanderers looking for a cold beer and a moment of solace. For Max, just back from his third deployment overseas, it was a place to unwind after weeks of chaos. The wooden door creaked as Max stepped inside, greeted by the hum of soft conversation and the raspy voice of Maggie Thompson playing on the jukebox. He scanned the room, noting a couple shooting pool, a group of friends laughing at the bar, and a few loners nursing their drinks. Max wasn't here to socialize, he only wanted to decompress. He chose a small table in the back, tucked away yet with a clear view of the room, his military instincts still sharp. Max's simple attire, his camouflage uniform blended into the dim ambience, save for the scuffed sneakers on his feet, shoes chosen for comfort, not appearance. He ordered a water, sipping it slowly as his thoughts wandered to his parents and his niece, excited to see him after so long. His sister had mentioned a family barbecue, and Max could almost taste the smoky ribs and hear the laughter around the table. The slam of the door jolted him from his thoughts. A group of 5 men strode in, their heavy boots thudding against the wooden floor. They were older, clad in leather jackets adorned with patches signaling their affiliation with a local veteran biker club. Their loud laughter and boisterous energy filled the room as they took seats at the bar. Max gave them a passing glance before returning to his water. But one of the men, a burly guy with a salt and pepper beard and piercing eyes, stopped mid-laugh, noticing Max. His demeanor shifted, and he muttered something to his group. Slowly the men turned to look at Max, their conversation falling to a low murmur. Max felt the weight of their stares, but remained composed, his shoulders relaxed and posture steady. He focused on the jukebox, letting the familiarity of Maggie Thompson's voice anchor him. The tension in the air grew, like the hum of an electric wire. The burly man, clearly the leader, rose from his bar stool. His boots echoed as he led the group toward Max's table. The room grew quieter. Even Lena paused, bottle in hand, watching the scene unfold. "Hey!" the leader barked, stopping a few feet from Max. His voice was rough, laced with mockery. "My shirt, where'd you get it? Army surplus?" The group snickered behind him. Max looked up, his expression calm but firm. "It's mine," he said evenly. "Earned it." The leader scoffed, stepping closer. "Earned it, huh? Doesn't look like you've seen much action. You play dress-up, looking for free drinks."
Damn.
Another man from the group chimed in. "Bet he doesn't even know how to salute." The laughter grew louder. Max stayed seated, his hands loosely folded on the table. His voice, when he spoke, was steady. "I don't owe you an explanation. But if you're looking to pick a fight, I'd think twice." The burly man leaned in, his beer-laden breath invading Max's space. "Think twice, huh? How about you show me some proof? Dog tags, ribbons, something real." Max exhaled slowly, his patience thinning. He stood up, his height and composed demeanor silencing some of the group's bravado. "I've seen plenty of guys like you," he said, locking eyes with the leader, loud, trying to prove something. "But you don't scare me." The tension snapped as the man lunged for Max's shirt. But Max moved with precision. He sidestepped, gripping the man's wrist and twisting it behind his back. In one swift motion, the burly leader was pinned against the table, his bravado replaced with a yelp of pain. The room erupted in gasps, Lena stepping forward with a warning glance at the rest of the group. "That's enough," she said, her voice firm. Max leaned in close to the pinned man's ear. "I fought for this country, just like you might have. But respect doesn't come from barking orders. It's earned." Max released him and the man stumbled backward, cradling his wrist. The rest of the group stayed frozen, unsure whether to step in or retreat. "You've made your point," one of them muttered, steering their leader toward the door. Max returned to his seat, his heart steady. Lena offered a nod of respect. Around him, murmurs of approval rippled through the crowd. That night, as Max drove home, the neon lights of Benny's faded in his rearview mirror. He felt a sense of peace, knowing he had stood his ground, not with fists, but with strength and dignity. "I told you to think twice before starting something," Max said, his tone calm but firm, his grip unyielding. "You don't know who you're messing with." His voice carried an air of authority, honed from years in the service, and it silenced any thoughts of retaliation from the remaining group. The leader, his face pressed against the table, gritted his teeth and muttered, "You're gonna regret this." But there was no strength in his threat, only the bitter residue of wounded pride. "Regret comes from doing the wrong thing," Max replied, releasing the man with a controlled shove. The leader stumbled forward, clutching his wrist, his bravado shattered. He turned to glare at Max, but his words were lost in the weight of the moment. The bartender, a sharp-eyed woman who had been silently assessing the situation, stepped forward, her hand still hovering near the phone. "I think it's time for you and your crew to leave," she said firmly, her eyes locking on the rest of the bikers. "We don't need this kind of trouble here." The group hesitated, exchanging uncertain glances. One of them, a wiry man with thinning hair, finally spoke up. "Come on, Gus," he muttered, addressing the leader. "Let's just go. It's not worth it." Gus looked ready to argue but seemed to think better of it. His injured pride and wrist weren't enough to push him further. With a final glare at Max, he spat, "This ain't over," and stormed toward the door, the rest of the group trailing behind him like a deflated wave. The bar was silent for a moment, the tension still thick in the air. Then the bartender spoke up again. "You okay?" she asked, her voice softer now as she looked at Max. "I'm fine," Max replied, his calm demeanor unchanged. He picked up his glass of water and took a sip, as if the entire encounter had been nothing more than a minor inconvenience. Around the room, the other patrons began to relax. Conversations resumed, albeit quieter and more subdued. A man near the jukebox gave Max a nod of respect, and a woman at the bar murmured, "That was something else." The bartender approached Max's table with a small smile. "First drink's on the house," she said. "Least I can do after that." Max shook his head. "Thanks, but I'm good with water," he said, his tone polite but firm. He didn't want anything that might blur his sharp edge, even now. As the night wore on, the bar slowly returned to its usual rhythm. Max stayed for another 15 minutes, quietly observing the room while finishing his drink. He could feel the occasional glances of admiration or curiosity, but he didn't let it distract him. When he finally left, the cool night air greeted him like an old friend. He climbed into his pickup, the faint hum of the bar's neon sign reflecting in the rearview mirror as he started the engine. The events of the evening played over in his mind, but he felt no regret. Later that night, sitting on the porch of his small rental house, Max let the quiet wash over him. The stars above seemed brighter in the rural darkness, a stark contrast to the intensity of the bar. He thought about Gus and his group, their hostility rooted in insecurity or prejudice, and wondered if they'd reflect on what had happened. Maybe they'd learn something, maybe not. Either way, he knew he'd stood his ground without lowering himself to their level. Max leaned back in his chair, the creak of the wood blending with the sounds of crickets in the distance. "Sometimes," he muttered to himself, "it's not about winning, it's about standing tall." He stayed on the porch for a while longer, letting the calm night remind him of the strength he carried, not just in his hands, but in his heart. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, but tonight he was at peace. "I saw it," the bartender said, her voice steady and clear. "This guy Gus went after him first. The soldier didn't start anything. He only defended himself." The officers exchanged a glance, their expressions remaining neutral but clearly assessing the credibility of the statement. The male officer turned back to the room. "Did anyone else see what happened?" A man near the pool table raised his hand hesitantly. "Yeah, I saw it. Gus was mouthing off, and when the soldier didn't take the bait, he tried to grab him. The guy didn't have a choice but to stop him." The female officer nodded and stepped closer to Max. "Do you have any form of identification to verify your service, sir?" she asked, her tone professional but not accusatory. Max nodded calmly, gesturing toward the duffel bag at his feet. "In my bag you'll find my military ID and my service jacket. You're welcome to take a look." The male officer crouched down, unzipping the bag and carefully pulling out the neatly folded camouflage jacket. He examined the patches and insignias before finding the ID card tucked into a pocket. Standing, he handed the items to his partner, who inspected them with equal diligence. "You're clear," she said, handing the items back to Max. "Thank you for cooperating." Gus, still nursing his injured wrist, glared at the officers. "You're just going to take his word for it? This guy's faking it. Look at him. No boots, no tags. He doesn't look like any soldier I've ever seen." The female officer's sharp gaze cut to Gus. "We've confirmed his identification, and multiple witnesses have corroborated his account of what happened. Now, do you want to explain why you and your buddies decided to confront him in the first place?" Gus faltered, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. One of his friends, the wiry man who had tried to intervene earlier, stepped forward. "Look, officer, we didn't mean for it to get out of hand. Gus he got carried away, that's all." "That's no excuse," the male officer said firmly. "This kind of behavior isn't acceptable, and it could have ended much worse. You're lucky no one got seriously hurt." The officers took a moment to consult each other, then addressed Gus and his group. "Here's what's going to happen," the female officer said. "We're filing a report about this incident. If you want to press charges for the supposed assault, we'll proceed. But you should know that false accusations are a serious matter, and we already have witness statements contradicting your version of events." Gus's face flushed red, and he glanced around the room, realizing he was outnumbered. With a grumble, he muttered, "Forget it," and motioned for his friends to follow him out of the bar. As the group left, the atmosphere in the room shifted. The tension dissipated, replaced by a mix of relief and quiet admiration for Max's composure. Lena walked over, offering Max a small smile. "That was handled better than most would have done. Drinks on the house if you want it." "Thanks," Max said, his voice steady, "but I'm good." He gathered his belongings, nodding at the officers as they prepared to leave. "Appreciate you stepping in." The male officer tipped his hat slightly. "You handled yourself well. Not everyone would have kept their cool like that." As Max stepped outside, the cool night air greeted him. The bar's neon sign flickered behind him, casting a soft glow on the parking lot. Climbing into his truck, he paused for a moment, his hands resting on the steering wheel. Tonight had been another reminder of the prejudices and challenges he often faced. But he felt no anger, only a quiet resolve. Back at home, sitting on his porch with a cup of coffee, Max replayed the events in his mind. He thought about Gus's arrogance and the onlookers who had chosen to speak up. It wasn't just about standing his ground, it was about showing others how to confront ignorance with strength and dignity. Sometimes, he realized, the battles you fight aren't on distant shores but right here, in the small, everyday moments that define who you are. Max leaned back in his chair, letting the night settle around him. He had faced many challenges in his life, and tonight was just another step in the journey of proving that respect and integrity would always prevail. Charlie shuffled awkwardly, glancing down at his boots as if searching for the right words. I just wanted to come by and say I'm sorry," Charlie finally said, his voice barely above a murmur, "for what happened at the bar. It wasn't right." Max raised an eyebrow, folding his arms as he leaned against the truck. "You were part of it," he said evenly. His tone wasn't accusatory, but it carried a weight that made Charlie squirm. "I know," Charlie admitted quickly, his eyes darting back up to meet Max's. "I didn't stop it, and I should have. Gus, well, he's got a way of riling people up, but that doesn't excuse what we did. I went along with it, and I shouldn't have." Max studied him for a long moment, the silence stretching between them. The sincerity in Charlie's voice seemed genuine, but Max had learned to trust actions more than words. "Why now?" he asked, his tone calm but probing. Charlie sighed, running a hand through his thinning hair. "Because I've been thinking about it since that night. The way you handled yourself. It stuck with me. You didn't lash out, didn't stoop to our level. You showed more strength than any of us, and it made me realize just how wrong we were." Max's posture relaxed slightly, though his expression remained guarded. "And what do you want from me now?" he asked. "Forgiveness?" Charlie shook his head. "I'm not here to ask for anything. I just wanted to own up to what I did, and let you know I'm trying to be better." What we did was wrong, and you didn't deserve any of it." The sincerity in Charlie's voice softened Max's gaze. He uncrossed his arms and let out a slow breath. "I appreciate you coming here," he said finally. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it's a step." Charlie nodded, a look of relief washing over his face. "Thank you," he said. "I mean that." As Charlie mounted his bike and started the engine, Max watched him go, feeling a strange mix of emotions. The incident at the bar had been ugly, a stark reminder of the prejudice he often faced. But Charlie's apology, however small, was a glimmer of hope that maybe, just maybe, change was possible. Later that evening, as Max sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, the sun dipping below the horizon, he reflected on the day. The battles he faced weren't always fought overseas. Some were right here at home, in moments like these, small, unremarkable interactions that carried the weight of change. He leaned back in his chair, letting the cool evening air wash over him. He knew the fight against ignorance wasn't over, but he also knew he wasn't fighting it alone, and that was enough to give him hope. Max stood in the driveway a moment longer, watching the fading silhouette of Charlie's motorcycle disappear down the road. The steady hum of the engine gave way to the soothing sounds of the evening, the chirp of crickets and the rustle of leaves in the breeze. It felt like the world was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. He turned back to his truck, wiping the last bit of grease from his hands with an old rag. The memory of Charlie's visit lingered, replaying in his mind like a film on loop. He hadn't expected it, not the apology, nor the raw vulnerability in Charlie's voice. In truth, Max wasn't sure what to make of it yet. But one thing was clear: it took courage for a man like Charlie to admit he was wrong. As Max leaned against the hood of the truck, he thought about the events of the past few days. The confrontation at the bar wasn't just another instance of prejudice, it was a reminder of how much work still needed to be done. It wasn't just the loud voices like Gus's that kept division alive, it was the quiet compliance of those who stood by and said nothing. But maybe, just maybe, people like Charlie could tip the scales. Max's thoughts drifted to his time in the service. Overseas, battles were clear-cut. The enemy was known, the mission defined. Here at home, it was different. The lines were blurry, and the enemy wasn't a person, but an idea, a deeply rooted ignorance passed down through generations. It was harder to fight, harder to measure progress. Yet moments like this reminded him that progress wasn't always visible. Sometimes, it was as subtle as a single person deciding to do better. Later that evening, Max sat on his porch with a cup of coffee, staring out into the twilight. The sun had dipped below the horizon, leaving a soft orange glow in its wake. He thought about the people he'd met during his service, men and women from all walks of life, bound by a shared purpose. They didn't care about the color of your skin or where you came from. What mattered was your character, your commitment, and your ability to stand strong when it counted. A small smile tugged at the corners of his mouth as he considered how far he'd come. The battles he faced now were different, but no less important. They were battles for understanding, for empathy, for change, and he realized he wasn't fighting them alone. People like Charlie, though flawed, were proof that change was possible. It started small, a conversation, an apology, but those small acts could ripple outward, shifting perspectives, one person at a time. As the night deepened, Max felt a sense of peace settle over him. He didn't know what tomorrow would bring, but he was ready to face it. The choices he made, the way he carried himself, those were his weapons now. And as far as he was concerned, they were just as powerful as any he'd wielded in combat. Sometimes, the greatest victories weren't won on a battlefield, but in the quiet moments, in the hearts and minds of people willing to listen and grow. The story of Max reminds me of the importance of standing firm in the face of prejudice and misunderstanding, while maintaining dignity and composure. In our daily lives, we often encounter situations where we're judged unfairly, whether at work, in social circles, or even in our communities. Like Max, it's crucial to approach these moments not with anger or aggression, but with calm strength and integrity. It's about choosing to educate rather than retaliate, knowing that our actions can plant seeds of change in others, even if we don't see the results immediately. For me, This story highlights the power of personal choices in shaping perceptions and bridging divides. If you ever face unfair treatment or ignorance, let your response be measured and thoughtful. A composed demeanor, combined with the courage to stand up for yourself, can create a lasting impact, not only on the person directly involved, but on everyone watching. Change begins with small acts of courage, and by remaining true to your values, you inspire others to reflect on their actions. Remember, progress isn't always loud or immediate. It's often in the quiet victories of changing one heart at a time.